Welcome to Hadeda Insights. Today's conversation is a little different and honestly a long time coming. We're calling this AdviceTech Reset 2026 because across the industry, we keep seeing the same pattern. Firms investing heavily in technology and still feeling stuck, frustrated, or exposed. So today I'm joined by Jen and Nina, the dynamic directors at LinkTank. These are two people who work at the coalface of advice technology week in and week out, and they've got some things to tell you. LinkTank works closely with advice firms of all sizes, helping them design, integrate, and optimize their technology ecosystems. While Hadeda focuses on helping advisors explore and compare tools, LinkTank operates at the deeper end of the stack, working hands-on with firms where technology decisions directly impact scale and compliance. Between Jen and Nina, they see the patterns, what works, what breaks, and why firms keep making the same tech mistakes, which I believe really frustrates them because they all just want to jump and get stuck in and solve all the problems. But there are a lot of stubborn resistance issues there where firms just refuse to make proper decisions and go around in an infinite loop, making little progress. So let's leave that for a little later. But this is an honest conversation about the biggest mistakes firms make when choosing tech, what the best firms do differently, and what must change as we head into 2026. Okay, let's get the conversation started. Firstly, welcome Jen and welcome Nina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks, Matthew. And thanks for that great intro.
Well, listen, I'm going to ask some questions and you guys can go fastest finger first, or you can just decide between yourselves who's going to take the questions. But let's get some honest conversation going. And let's ask a really good question. What is the most common reason you see firms ending up with the wrong tech stack?
Sure, Matthew. I think a lot of that stuff hasn't really changed in the last sort of 12 years since we've been in business. It's one of those things. But I think most firms don't buy bad tools. That's not really the problem. The problem is really more around misaligned decisions because they tend to start with their immediate needs and features in mind, and they don't consider the entire ecosystem. And they don't think about how the data and business processes and people need to intersect to make any individual system work. So I think that's one of the key things. Nina, I don't know if you've got insight into that.
I think it comes down to they don't interrogate their overall business requirements before they start the journey. So they plunge into looking at technology and sit through demos and do all sorts of interesting things, but they've gone into the journey without actually understanding what their business needs. And I think that's one of the big tripping up points.
I think another thing is that decisions are sometimes they end up being vendor-led rather than FSP-led or business-led, because for exactly the reason Nina stated, if you're going into the demo phase without a really firm understanding of what you want and what you don't want and how it impacts your overall ecosystem, then the technology roadmap is defined by whoever was last in the door with a compelling demo. That's the reality. It often ends in tears, and then it unfairly also gets blamed on the tech provider, which isn't always the case.
So actually what you're saying a little bit is sometimes the firms gravitate towards features rather than an actual workflow fit. And why do you think that is?
I think the tech vendors are so adept at selling their products. That's what they're there to do, okay? They're not there to help you understand what your business needs. And in many cases, they have no insight into how a business works. So they come in and they do their demo, and it can be a completely overwhelming experience for the business itself because they're seeing a lot of things all at once, but they're not seeing how it fits into their business. Then they tend to get attached to a certain part of whatever the feature is, and that one feature then dominates the whole decision. So that piece looked like it worked well and it would fit us there, but actually 90% of the rest is nothing that we need or it doesn't fit. And it's not a tech vendor problem. Their job is to sell their software. That's their job. But the advisory business itself doesn't have enough understanding of what they need to sit and watch that and be able to pick it apart and say, okay, we can see that little glitzy part we don't actually need, but the 5 other pieces that sort of work in the background is exactly what we need. So I think that's why they end up with features that look great, but don't necessarily fit the business.
And so then you get a couple of vendors coming in and selling you different things, and you've got tech that's kind of sits all over your business, and you have firms buying tools in silos, CRM over there and compliance over there and planning something else. What happens when that happens?
Chaos happens when that happens. So it comes back to deliberate choices about understanding, how your overall business workflow creates a journey for your advisors, for your administrative teams, and for your clients. So if the journey is staggered because the technology is not considered and integrated, then the experience is going to be staggered and stuttered as well. So and that causes frustration inside the business and also from a servicing perspective and a competitive advantage perspective, because I think clients increasingly expect a seamless and largely online experience these days, in addition to the personal relationship. So I think it just doesn't support the business growth plan in any shape or form. And I think that's also why there's so much unhappiness about the cost of technology, because it's very difficult to pin down a return on that investment if you haven't had a plan from the outset.
And it must be frustrating for you guys to come in after the fact and see all these frustrations when in fact you could have been there from the start and helped from the start set up a good strategy for selecting tech. Okay, well, listen, any of you, which of these mistakes causes the most damage long term, even if it feels kind of small at the time?
I think it rolls up to an overall business decision. So most businesses, as we know, have a business strategy. They know where they're going, or they should know where they're going over 1, 2, and 3 years, or whatever that period may be. And I think where they fail is to recognize that technology in itself is a strategy, and they are not choosing a system simply for what it's going to do for them today, maybe solve a workflow problem or whatever the case may be. What they need to understand is they're choosing to go on a technology journey that is going to either enhance or not against their business strategy. So if their business strategy is to say we want to engage with clients in a more friendly format, and they haven't gone back to their technology strategy and said, how are we going to make this possible? Because you cannot do that in person anymore. I mean, people just don't work like that in the real world anymore. So instead, they need to go back and say, what is my technology strategy and how does it align and enhance and enable my business strategy? So I think that is the thing that they neglect to do. And then you start breaking it down into neglecting to look at the business requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So I think but it rolls up to say, what does my business need? What is my strategy? Where am I going? And how is my technology going to enable that? It's one picture, and they need to bring the two together.
Just in fairness, for all of these firms, I mean, they're really good at what they do. They might know where they want to go, but a tech strategy and what tech best fits to get them there is something quite different. Doesn't mean they're necessarily good at that. And also to try and compare tech and know what's out there, it's challenging. So one can almost, not fault them for getting it wrong. But of course, you want to get involved before and help get it right, because the cost, as you know, of getting things wrong is frustration and actual costs out of pocket. Let's not focus too much now about what they're doing wrong. Let's spin it around and put it positively. What do you see the best firms getting right?
So obviously starting with a clear strategy, so understanding the dynamic and the role that technology needs to play in your client experience, your compliance, your scaling, your growth, and exactly, so being able to define exactly how you want technology to empower those your business. So I think that's one thing. And then I think the other thing is just being able to zoom out, which is actually quite a rare thing. It's quite a difficult thing, I think, for a lot of advice businesses to do, to be able to zoom out and look at a blueprint of how your business operations function and being able to plot where does the technology ecosystem fit into that to support it? So good implementations frequently start with those types of things. And then also, I think importantly, the perception that a technology implementation is a one-time event. I think that's another thing, that the best implementations we've seen are those where the business really appreciates that you're not going to achieve everything by creating users and putting them on training. That actually you need a multi-year strategy probably to implement all the things and to embed them to really add value. And they need to be measurable things so that you can also, work out whether you've got a return. So I think that's the upside of what we see a lot more of now than we used to.
Jen, you're jumping to implementation, and that is
Sorry.
that gives firms absolute nightmares, because of course it's easy to have a sales pitch to buy something, and then to implement, you guys know that's something completely different. But can I take a step back? Okay. So let's just take a step back on how high-performing firms actually evaluate technology before buying. Any tips or anything? And I'm sure a lot of firms will be leaning in right now to listen to this.
If only there were a business that did this, that offered a service like this. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Well, yeah, I suppose people don't know what they don't know, and they don't realize they need so much help, because even me listening to you now, there's just so much that goes into even just evaluating technology before you even think about implementing.
Yeah, it's a very complicated thing now more than ever, because although we've achieved a lot more maturity and there's been great evolution in our advice tech landscape in South Africa, and we've got great stuff, but it's increasingly complex because I think a lot of solutions are slimming down. We're seeing a lot more vendors playing in very specific places where they do one thing and do it really, really well, rather than trying to spread across all areas. So there's a lot more of that kind of thing, which is amazing, but it also makes your ability to search for, to even identify, to know what's out there and what the potential solutions are. So that's a stumbling block already, because you can't chat GPT that at the moment. There just isn't enough information online. Fortunately, this is one of the things that we recognized a few years ago in LinkTank, that because we do so many vendor selection type projects with the FSPs, we recognized the need to be able to do this in a much shorter and not corporate ways. So to take the principles of a large kind of RFI and evaluation project and to reduce it to something that is automatable, which we've now done in Hadeda's Tech Finder. So that is live and available, and infinitely cheaper than a consulting environment. So definitely the most appropriate place to start, because out of that you're identifying who's out there, and you're also identifying in a guided way your business needs and what solutions fit them and how they integrate, and a rough guide on pricing.
So now we've got to the evaluation, we've got some assistance, there's tools out there, there's people out there that can help. Implementation brings a whole new kettle of fish, and obviously you guys are as able to help with a good implementation plan. But what you've seen, what does a good implementation plan include that most firms actually just skip?
I think one of the most important things is identify a clear understanding. You can put in a step-by-step plan, put in the users, roll out, train, whatever the case may be. But the thing that's often lacking is a very clear understanding of each stakeholder's role in the process. And the vendor has expectations, the business has expectations, and if they don't clear up what those expectations are, you go into an implementation and the business is expecting the vendor to do a certain thing, and that doesn't happen. It's very important to be clear about that from upfront. The tech vendor is very clear about what part they do, and the business needs to understand that they need to actually allocate a project leader for this. They need to allocate a project team. They need to allocate somebody who's going to help manage those users, because believe me, that's a huge stumbling block. So it's not good enough to say the tech vendor's bringing they plop it in your business, they onboard all the users, they train them for half an hour or half a day or whatever the case may be, and then they walk away. And then the business says, well, what now? So the business needs to understand at the start of that process, what is our part in this and what do we need to provide the resources, the time, the energy to enable that implementation to actually work.
And, we hear so often that it's all well, you buy a product and that's great. Then come time to implement and you feel left at sea. There's no support, there's no help, and now you don't know what to do. And unfortunately, also you hear, business has many moving parts, many people with different functions. And
Mm,
this implementation often gets done in a small silo and then rolled out to everyone. And suddenly everyone's got to jump on and no one knows how
yeah.
to use it, gaps in service, and it creates such a headache. So, how do smart firms create buy in across advisors, admin, compliance, and leadership?
From the top.
From the top and from the beginning. The most
Yeah.
important thing, involve your team from the beginning. Give them a voice in that decision. So advisors might think they understand how their operational staff are working, and usually that understanding is probably about 50 or 60% deep. There's always stuff going on in your back office that you are not aware of. And it's important to get everybody involved and give them a voice and an opinion. So when you're having a demo, then get the people in, let them see what that system does, and let them give their feedback after the demo itself. So I think that pulling that team along with you, instead of right at the end where you say, we've chosen the system, here it is, you start tomorrow, and they actually don't know what it does, what their expectation is, how it's going to fit into their work, and what do? They end up going back to the old way because
So now the firm has contacted LinkTank or Hadeda, done the evaluation, chosen what seems to be a good fit, had a handheld with implementation and had a good strategy, rolled it out. We're a year on. How do we measure return on investment beyond kind of, well, we're just using it?
Yeah, that's I think probably one of the trickiest questions, and it really depends from firm to firm, because if you had started out at the very beginning identifying what you want to achieve through the project, rather than just looking at the features that you need users to have because that's what they had in the old system, I think you end up with a really defined view of what your business goals are, and for each goal there should be a measurement criteria like KPIs, because at the end of the day you want to see how deeply you've managed to penetrate every one of those goals, and you want to be able to use the learnings from that to inform your future iterations or upgrades or rollouts or additional software implementations, and you want to be able to review those things on at least an annual basis in your implementation plan, because your continuous enhancement relies heavily on that. So measuring RFI comes down to, I think, knowing what it is that you want, and being able to tie all of those costs and efforts together to be able to determine whether you're meeting those goals.
As a firm and their relationship with technology, is this kind of a once off dance, or do you think this should be an ongoing discipline? What are you guys seeing the best firms doing?
Definitely ongoing, reviewed often, and with many iterations. It's not I think sobering, to realize that the industry is never going to go back to the way that it was 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. And technology is such an enormous and critical part of the advice ecosystem. And through technologies like AI, that is only going to grow. I think it is extremely short-sighted for any business to think that they can have a growth and sustainability plan that does not include a really robust technology strategy that is managed like a key objective, and that your data asset in your business is a key asset that needs to be nurtured just like any other. And I think too few firms realize that or really capitalize on that. And it is a competitive differentiator. It really is.
Okay, You mentioned AI. Let's zoom out a little bit and ask some bigger questions. How do you see AI actually changing advice workflows right now?
Oh, it's like everybody has an opinion on this, and there are so many potential answers. I think in the immediate future, what we're going to see is it's already happening. I think the convergence between regulatory technology and kind of advice or servicing platforms. And I think that will become more and more the case going forward. We're seeing lots of integrations there. But I think longer term, we have to acknowledge that there are things that AI is way better at than humans. And I think it's really, really important for every advice firm to be taking a look at this now and dividing up the functions or the activities that are better human centric and the activities that are better AI centric, because it's most definitely coming and it will most definitely be disruptive. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So my view is that the firms that will excel and do well in the future of AI, I think are going to be the ones that really have a good understanding of that, what is human and what is, and to really work hard on focusing on the human parts of it, the relationship and the wisdom. So hybrid, I think we're heading into a hybrid human AI advice space in the next few years.
Through all of the positive advancements, where do you still see data and integration falling apart?
That's the sad part of the story, because more than a decade on, we're still not seeing as much as we would like to in that integration space. But we are definitely seeing a lot more activity. I think what started to happen is that there are little clusters of tools and vendors that are starting to collaborate. There's a handful that went out with an integration strategy, particularly the smaller the tools that are quite purpose specific. So we are seeing a bit more activity in that space, but it's not really moving the needle yet in terms of user satisfaction. Our survey still shows that integration is the single biggest perceived frustration in advice businesses, despite the additional services and options that are available in that space. And I think some of it has to do with integration depth. Some of it has to do with selecting products, with an ecosystem in mind, because I must just reiterate that to this day, I've still yet to walk into any business that uses one software platform, start to finish, for every single function in their business. It's not a thing. The ecosystem is, every business has a tech ecosystem, and you need to make considered choices to make it,
So guys, in your opinion, what new tech categories have you seen emerging that advisors should be paying attention to?
I think the ones that we're seeing that are more prevalent in wish lists than we saw a few years ago, and I think this is somewhat confirmed in last year's survey report, are direct client-facing applications and tools. So it seems to be whereas sort of a decade ago, it was much more about the back end and the kind of servicing and operations. And we're finding that tech roadmaps are much more focused these days on empowering the relationship directly between the advisor and the end client. So we're seeing a lot of quite cool stuff in the lead generation space, and lots of advancements in the data aggregation space. I think one quite underrated area that, well, certainly we play a lot in that space, but I think there are some tools out there that advisors could use themselves, is the bits in between the systems. So the integration options being one, but also things like business intelligence or management information tools to help you make sense of the stuff that happens between systems and through them, because I think it's become more and more clear to all sizes of financial advice businesses that deep business insights into what's going on and what the risks and the opportunities are essential for decision making going forward. And so you need that overarching view of what's going on in your business without having to spend 2 weeks of the month pulling together spreadsheets to report on that.
If you had to kind of put your finger on one mistake you guys both see weekly that firms could avoid tomorrow, I mean, just one, what would that be?
What underlies some of that is data quality. So I mean, one of the most painful things that happens through any software transition typically is some sort of a data migration, which is always painful. Still see that a lot of businesses don't value their data as an asset, and so don't put effort into making sure that it is valuable and that they can really meaningfully use it to drive growth and business goals and so on. If you think about any AI project, the two key ingredients it needs to be able to successfully deliver an expected result is accurate data and access to a range of meaningful data that can be interpreted, and a really clear understanding of business rules, and to be able to interpret that data and do something meaningful with it. And so even if you don't have an immediate AI strategy, your strategy should be around increasing your data asset value, because any strategy you have later that has an AI spin to it will fit neatly over that.
So all I'm really hearing from you guys is there is a lot to consider and think about before signing a contract.
Yeah, that's the bottom line.
What do you believe will fundamentally change in AdviceTech in 2026? Any takers for this one?
Sure. That's not an easy question.
Your first guess.
I don't think we work in 1 year cycles. But I do think there's, I mean, we've had an enormous jump in interest in AI and daily use of AI, just not even really sophisticated stuff, kind of meeting notes and transcriptions and those types of things. But we're finding that you're hard pressed to find an advisor that isn't using something in their business or a practice. And I think that is only going to accelerate this year. I think we're on a path that we can't even see the end of yet.
Jen and Nina, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. One of the reasons we're actually having this conversation is that the industry lacks shared benchmarks, and everyone feels the friction, but don't always have the data to prove where things break or what good really looks like. If this conversation has resonated with you, there's a reason for it. We're currently running the Linktank and Hadeda AdviceTech Survey 2026, and this is designed to map what advisors are really using, what's really working, what's failing, and where the industry needs to evolve so we can get out of that infinite circle of frustration. If you want better benchmarks, better insights, and better tools, please participate in the survey. You'll find a link in the description. Help us map the industry and help shape what AdviceTech looks like next. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Nina, for an unfiltered conversation. And thank you very much for watching Hadeda Insights. Until next time.
Yes.